Hello and welcome back to this course of videos on MongoDB. In this video we will continue to walk through the code which does an AJAX post request from our registration form on the front end to our register.php backend, and we will insert the data from the registration page into we've already inserted it into MySQL. Now we are inserting it into Mongo. And then we will look at the data event listener on the main.js file on the client side. So, in the previous video, we did the code to find in our Mongo database the most, if I just use db.customers.find so we can see the whole table, we want to find the maximum ID, the max value for the ID field, because this underscore ID is our primary key. So we already did that, and now we are ready to insert into our Mongo database. I'll just put it in document script mode there. So we're doing a try catch statement, as you can see, and here's our collection object, which represents our customer's object, and we are doing the insert one method. Now again, as we saw previously, the syntax for that the PHP driver demands to talk to Mongo is slightly different to the Mongo, the native Mongo code. Now, the native Mongo code uses the object, the curly brackets, the object notation, to pass in the values that you want to insert to the database, but you can see here we're using an array to insert these values. I can just show you a video that we made earlier on inserting documents. This is just a screenshot of a previous video, and you can see it's the curly braces. It's just like a regular JavaScript object that we're passing in. That's really like a JSON object, but you can see here it's an array. And the other difference is you can see we're using these colons to separate the key value pairs, just like a regular JavaScript object. But with the PHP driver, you're actually using this double-lined arrow here. But I suppose apart from that, everything else is the same. So we're using, and just a quick note, we're using the insert one method instead of insert here. So we're trying to do this. If it's successful, then it will echo congratulations. Use the first name variable, you successfully registered. Now, one last thing we want to do, now that we have populated these submitted values into both of our databases, we just want to also populate those same values into the PHP session object. So we can persist that data for the remainder of the session in case the user wants to use it again. So the final thing to look at is just a catch statement. If there's an error, we simply echo back to the client that there was an issue. So that's the code completed on the server side. The code has been, the data has been inserted into the Mongo collection as well as the MySQL table. So we now go back to main.js and we will look at our success handler. So when we get our 200 OK response, what is our client going to do? So basically, just first of all, we're going to make sure the data doesn't equal blank. And just as a note, this data that is being passed back into the success event handler is actually whatever we echo from the PHP side. So this is what we're going to see is we've got a couple of echoes in here. In the MySQL code, assuming the happy path, we're going to echo congratulations, you successfully registered with MySQL. And on the Mongo side, we're going to echo congratulations, you successfully registered with Mongo. So that is what is going to be passed as an argument for this parameter into the success event handler. So assuming it's nothing, empty string, we are going to get the span register, which actually, we won't look at the HTML code, but it sits basically, the span just sits in the div underneath here, underneath the submit button. And if it was success, so the reason we know if it was successful is if congratulations is actually included within this data string that is passed back, because you can see on both of the echoes that work, we actually say the word congratulations here. So before we actually look at the client-side code that's going to run upon successful insert into Mongo and MySQL and the 200 OK response, I'm just going to actually show you it live, what occurs when you submit, when the user does actually register. So I'm going to hit my submit button here, and a few things will happen. And we will walk through these things that just happened in code. If you look, the first thing I do is I change the inner HTML of the register button to edit registration details here. And that actually allows the user, if they decide they want to change their registration details, they can. Second thing I do here is btn delist. That was actually that's this button here. That was hidden before. That had a CSS display property of none. And I've used JavaScript here to say .style.display equal and change it from none to inline. So then this delist button appears, so the user can actually remove their data from both databases, and we'll walk through that later. Another thing I do is I take change the inner HTML of the span login and change it to you are logged in as, and take the first value from the email array. Now the span login is actually on the home page, and it's this here, because I want to update. And if you remember, this is a SPA application, so these two documents are on exactly the same index.php file. So very simply, I can just reference this span login and update it to you are logged in as, and then change it to this particular email address. Just a quick note, we're taking, this is the first object, the 0th object of the email array, so it's going to be pulling this particular field here. Now, another thing that I'm doing is I am actually changing the display attribute, the CSS display attribute of the btn logout button, and changing that to inline. Again, if we go back to here, the home page, I'm having a bit of trouble clicking here, strange mouse. So you see this appeared, this wasn't there before, because when a user registers, we also want to automatically log in. We don't want to have them register and then separately have to log in. So we now we consider they're logged in. I have to provide this logout button as well, and I simply did that, like I said, by changing display CSS attribute to inline. The final thing I'm going to do is I'm going to disable the first email field, which is this field here, because this is the primary key on our, if you look at our MySQL database here, and we look at the customer emails table, in fact we'll look at the design view here, you can see that the email address is the primary key. So we don't want the user, when the user is editing their data, if they edit their registration details, we don't want them changing this, because that is a primary key. So that brings us to the end of the code required for the user registering and submitting their data to our Mongo and MySQL databases. So just to recap what we walked through, on the client side, we did an AJAX request using the jQuery library. It was a post request to register.php. The payload that we sent was a JavaScript object containing the user's data from this form, and that was stringified into JSON and then pass to register.php. On the register.php side, we required this to connect to the MySQL and Mongo databases, and then we used the post PHP global to pull the payload that was sent, again this data, and then we used JSON.decode to convert it back from a JSON object into a regular PHP object. Once it was in a regular PHP object, we passed out the individual values into these variables. Once we had these variables, we then inserted into the MySQL table. First of all, we got the max value from our customers table. Then we used a transaction to make sure that both the customers table and the emails table were both inserted to. Remember, it was all or nothing, and that's how the transaction worked. And then we used our commit statement here. If there's an error, we would roll back. Then on the Mongo side, we leveraged our PHP driver and library to write this code to actually insert. First of all, we found the maximum value of the ID field, same as we did on the MySQL side, and then we inserted into our single collection. Remember, on the Mongo side, it was a single collection. On PHP, on MySQL, we had to insert into two separate tables. We then populated the session PHP global so we could persist the data for later. Back to main.js on the client side, the data success event picked up the data that was echoed back, and then we made some modifications to the client side so that the user can automatically be logged in and thus be able to log out, delist, and edit their registration details. So I hope this gives you good insight into how to insert data into Mongo and MySQL from PHP, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.